Welcome to WP Tonic, episode 168. Today we're talking, what is user experience design? What's the role of a UX designer in a project? Before I let the panel introduce themselves, I wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsor today, Liquid Web. While most of you know Liquid Web as a managed hosting company with tons of options, recently they've designed a managed WordPress offering that's perfect for mission-critical sites. And if you're looking for improved performance, maximized uptime, and incredible customer support, Liquid Web is the hosting partner that you've been looking for. Every Liquid Web managed WordPress customer also has iThemes Sync integrated into their management portal, and this allows them to update several sites with a single touch. So if you sign up today using the discount code WPTonic33, you'll get a 33% discount for the next 6 months. Just visit liquidweb.com/WordPress to get started and use that discount code WPTonic33. With that, I'll let the panel introduce themselves. We'll start with our guests. Chrissy, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Absolutely. So I call myself a UX engineer, and basically that means I do design and development. So lots of investigating of users and who they are and what makes them, and then designing for those users and then developing as well. And I have my own business called North UX, and we really just focus on websites. And personally, I am married and have 2 cute little kiddos. So lots of momming going on as well.
Excellent. Sally, introduce yourself.
Certainly. My name is Sally Getch. My business is WP Fangirl. I do mostly custom theme development on the Genesis framework, and I'm the organizer of the East Bay WordPress meetup in Oakland, California.
Excellent. And Jackie.
I am Jackie D'Elia, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I do custom web design and development. I mostly work in Genesis, and I love working with SVGs.
SVGs are awesome. And yes. Kim.
I'm Kim Shivler. I teach WordPress, focusing on building learning management platforms and membership sites.
Cool. Jonathan.
Hi there, folks. I'm the founder of WP Tonic. We're a WordPress service maintenance company. We also do larger projects in trade or direct with clientele. We're your trusted partner.
Definitely. And I'm John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design, and I help blue-collar businesses with custom WordPress development and local SEO. Before we get into today's main topic, we have a few news stories. The biggest one that's out there that has caught my eye is there is an article on Medium. It's now just on the archive.org, the Wayback Machine, where someone wrote an article called Stop Malware on the security of the 27% of the websites on the internet. This is by a fellow named Scott. I'm going to butcher his name. Arkuszewski. Anyway.
It's probably something like Arkuszewski.
There you go. Okay. But basically, this was all about having like a signing, like when the servers, like the WordPress.org servers, like do an update. You want to have like digital signing to where there is no man-in-the-middle attacks. And Matt Mullenweg, there is an article on the, actually he posted on Medium. The Tavern wrote about this. He basically said, digital signatures for updates are important, but for right now we're focusing on the customizer and design and stuff like that. So, Chrissy, thoughts on this news story?
Well, I haven't read the story, so
okay, that's cool.
I don't know that I have any thoughts.
There you go, Sally.
Never stopped me.
right?
Yes, you're completely free to talk about things you know nothing about on this panel.
That's a
As long
stop.
as long as you can do so authoritatively. Right. So, I think all of this was triggered by the fact that there's been there was a vulnerability discovered in the REST API, which is somewhat ironic, as lots of people have been touting the REST API as more secure than XML RCPC, and I'm sure overall it probably will be, but there was this little problem, and although it was not announced until after the patch was released, there been a whole bunch of exploits. And so, because WordPress is so big, that attracts people's attention. I don't know enough about things like cryptography and security to have a sense of how much difference it would make to do the digital signing thing on this. I mean, it seems like that's not necessarily the cause of this particular problem. And although it would likely be a good thing to have it, I don't know whether it's critical. I think the WordPress core team on the whole has been very good about responding to security issues, and so I don't think there's particularly a need to panic. And I wonder a little bit about the fact that this guy unpublished his story and what's going on with that.
Yeah, I thought that was a little weird. So maybe there was some sort of either second thoughts or external pressure. Who knows? Jackie, any thoughts on the digital signatures for the updates? Is this?
So are we talking about digital signatures just for the WordPress core updates, or are we talking about it for plugin updates?
Well, I mean, I think the main topic was for the core updates, but I would think for the plugin updates, that's communicating with WordPress org as well. I know WordFence had a article on this too. We'll link that up as well in show notes. But yeah, any thoughts at all on this?
Well, I mean, okay, so you get a core update, it comes from WordPress. So are they, I guess basically people are saying there's a possibility that your update could be coming from somewhere else, and that's a security risk?
So the thing is it could be coming from the same server, but if the file has been tampered with and it's not the original file, you would need a digital signature to say, like, this is indeed the original file. It hasn't been tampered with in transit.
Well, then I'm in favor of that for sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I could also say, I mean, I guess this is just how things go with open source. So it's, I guess if it was a proprietary platform, that would be a different thing. You've got a lot of different interests pulling in different directions. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like that to me is a huge priority, although I think it is important. And I could understand maybe why they want to defer that for a little bit. I'd be more concerned about plugins myself, because some of the plugin updates don't come from the repo at all, and they just basically come from the publishers. So, and you really don't have any idea where those sources are, or what servers those are located on, and who's checking those things. And you're bringing all this stuff into your WordPress site kind of blind in that regard. So I think that would be more of a concern to me than the core updates.
That's another excellent point. There are like a lot of updates that don't, come from .org, but they come from the actual software publishers. And again, because it's open source, we just, trust things that come in. Yeah, that's.
I mean, you don't know that they could be hacked and have their updates changed, and you could be downloading those and just, you see the little note in your plugin, you need to update your plugins, and you do it. So I think that poses a real security issue if you don't have somebody who's really monitoring those plugin updates and who has access to them.
No, that's an excellent point. That's true. For every plugin that you have in your site, and especially ones that are external and not just from .org, that is a potential, not only for a plugin conflict, but just making sure like that is not going to demolish your site. Kim, any thoughts on these stories and digital signatures? Was Matt wrong to blow this off, or was this even something that you were thinking about?
Like Sally, I don't know a lot about cryptography, but what I did read in the articles is this definitely was not what happened here. It's a possible in the future.
Right.
And so I kind of got what Matt was saying. Okay, it's important. However, is it as important as some other things? I definitely agree with Jackie. I think, pulling things off of plugin sites, you have no idea where they're coming from. I mean, obviously I would be preaching to the choir here, but backups, people, have your backups before you do any of that. So I can see why this guy, that's his deal, is the cryptography, and I'm sure he knows a lot more of how dangerous it is than I do. But I also see Matt's side. As far as the push for the core over plugins, though, at least to start with that, I get that, because if you were going to try to attack this, who would you go for? Right? If I'm going for WordPress.org, I know that every single update's coming from there, as opposed to betting on, do I go get this one plugin, unless it's something like a WooCommerce that so many people have. You have to look at how many people actually would it affect. Whereas I think his point on the core is 27% of the internet could be affected. So that was where I saw where that guy was coming from on core.
Yes, mind you, statistics tend to show that the vulnerability comes from not doing the updates, not from anything that's actually in them.
Jonathan, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, I did try and get Robert from WP White Security to join us, but unfortunately he was traveling and he said he wasn't available, because it's really very, like what Sally said, it's really very difficult, and what some of the other panelists have said, to make a judgment call, because it's such a specialized area. What Matt response to it, I think also seemed reasonably logical to me. I think also the amount of publicity the article got and the response was really down to what happened with the Restless API. So it was that this whole area is a little bit sensitive anyway, normally, but it was heightened by what happened there, and it has affected people and live websites to some extent. So I also thought it was typical Matt at the end. He said, I'm publishing it on this because this platform is where you ran. I did think that was
that was pretty humorous. Yeah.
I thought that was typical Matt, really.
Matt got his think piece in.
Yeah, exactly. It is really difficult. I'm not. The other aspect of it is, you do have a lot of. We had all this situation and still do, where hosting providers, some of them provide very customized WordPress solutions, and when you try and migrate the site, and we have done that ourselves, it's not been as smooth as it should be, because they've done all sorts of things in the background and they haven't made it very clear what they've done. So we've had a couple of those, but that's a totally different to the article. But it's all about, open source and being able to just do what you like with it to some extent, even though there's more legal restrictions than most people are aware of.
Yeah, and that's something that rolls right into our next story, which is the REST API vulnerabilities that are being reported by Sucuri and WordFence. And this was also an article from the Tavern. And I'll start with you, Jonathan, and we'll go back around the room. But Sucuri said it was on the low end, maybe like 50,000 sites with 20 to 30 pages were defaced. And WordFence was saying on the upwards of 1.8 million pages were defaced. Our own Morten Rand Hendrickson was saying that the REST API should be disabled by default, and you should choose to enable it. Any thoughts on this, Jonathan? And then we'll go back around.
Who knows? I don't know where either of those security companies get their data from, so it's practically impossible unless they publicize where they got it from.
I think part of it was the Google Index. That was part of it, yeah.
I think it has affected some sites. How many? I think it's probably between the 50 and the 1.5 million. The truth is somewhere in the middle, probably. Well, that percentage-wise isn't enormous, but if it's one of your websites, it is rather important, isn't it? But I also agree totally with Morten. It should have been deactivated as standard, and you activate it when you need it. It just seems common sense to me that should be the way it should be set up, John.
Maybe in 4.7.3 or 4.8. Yeah, Chrissy, any thoughts on problems with the REST API and people having to update in 4.7.2? Do you have any just thoughts, concerns? How are you approaching this?
I'm a big fan of the REST API, so, but I see both sides of everything. I totally think that there's certainly a case to be made for it being something that you choose to activate. At the same time, I think there's a lot of plugins that are tapping into it, and so it gets a little bit hairy when, Joe Schmo user installs a plugin and doesn't realize that it's not going to be fully functional because they haven't activated the REST API. And so I mean, I think you have to be careful. And I also think that there is, I mean, if you're actually talking about, if you have to activate it, well, then why is it in core? No other pieces of core really work like that. So I think it's new. I think that people aren't as aware of it. I don't know that I mean, yeah, my thought would be either it's not in core and you have to install it as a plugin to use it, which, I mean, certainly that's how it was tested out. Or it's in core, and I do think that there's absolutely a case for it being in core, and the reality is, like, it's going to be used, and it's another piece that people have to be aware of when they're using WordPress, that it's there. And I think more and more people will be using it, so to put that extra step in there of activating it or installing another plugin to get certain things to work is probably not the best user experience.
Yeah, there you go. Sally, any thoughts on the REST API and the 4.7.2 update?
Well, what she said, but I think it's not that hard if it was not enabled by default and plugins depended on it. You would just need to be sure the plugin developers knew that, so that they could do a check and pop up a warning if it's not enabled, because you see that with other plugins. If they're like WooCommerce extensions, you can't activate them without having WooCommerce activated, that kind of thing. So it could be worked around if it turned out to be a good option. I don't know whether it's a good option. As Chrissy said, it's the other things in core don't work that way. Maybe some of them should, but because it might be nice in a way to be able to either be able to turn them off if you don't want them, or only turn them on if you need them. Don't know which it might be. Don't know which way around would be better for users, and without actually doing a bunch of user testing, we wouldn't necessarily know. But I think you could make an argument for being able to turn certain core things off if you aren't using them to, increase performance or whatever.
Definitely.
And then the other thing is, I suppose because the API is a way to reach in there, turning it off will, kind of protect you in a way like turning off XML RPC does. But, if the issue is that the code that makes it up has a vulnerability in it, just deactivating it wouldn't necessarily fix the vulnerability.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, you also got the whole argument about, as like which the RESTless API is a good example of, as you increase the functionality of the base product, so it covers many different users' criteria, what they're looking for. Some people say it's really WordPress is getting too far away from an easy to use blogging platform. The only way I can see that you can answer some of those arguments is through modularization. Is there such a word? Well, there should be, shouldn't there? Where you kind of, you have modules and you can add them or not add them, but then you got the whole thing, which is our main topic, usability and UX design. That can have its own problems and consequences itself, can't it, John?
Definitely. Jackie, what are your thoughts on this? Content injection. As Sue Curry says, they're seeing more content injection type of attacks with the REST API. Is this something we should be able to turn off in core, or just any thoughts at all?
Well, given that it's so new and there are problems, right? So there's security issues that are cropping up, bugs, problems that need to be fixed. I think to go back to what Jonathan said, I agree that there's lots of different types of users, right? So somebody is installing it to just have a simple blog platform. Having it off by default might not be such a bad idea, but having it easy and obvious to turn on and off would be helpful. And I liked what Sally said about, plugins should, if they're going to be utilizing it, then test for it being on. And if it isn't, just alert the user that it needs to be on. If they're installing plugins, then they're comfortable working in the dashboard and doing things anyway. So I think that would make a lot of sense. But I think until all the security holes are plugged and tightened up, because obviously you shouldn't be able to inject content, right? So then that means that there's a problem. So it's not that shutting it off is the answer, it's fixing the security holes in it. But in the meantime, having the ability to shut it off would be helpful, especially if you don't have a fix for it right away. And there is a vulnerability, and you just need to let people know to shut it off. I mean, for my clients, I would like that option to be able to do that.
Well, definitely. I do think the remote code executions are kind of like the new XML RPC attacks. But I mean, to be clear, like any site can be attacked. Kim, thoughts on them?
That was kind of my point. With or without this, there are vulnerabilities, folks. That's just the way it is. My thought on turning it on or off really is, how pervasive is it with the plugins? And the more popular it gets with plugins, the more confusing I think it becomes to the user if it's off. And then their plugin isn't working, like Chrissy said. So I think if they were to pull that, it really has to be well documented within the plugins that they check for it, and then either they can turn it on or let you know this has to be turned on, so it's not just more confusion for people. And then the other one is Sally's point. Do we know that if it's deactivated, there aren't still security issues? Because sometimes just having the code there can be a security issue. And I don't know that for this one. So that would be my question before saying, oh, that's just the be all end all, we turn it off. Because if it's still an issue, you haven't solved anything.
I think you're right. I like I said, it's the endpoints being integrated into core. It's still a new thing. There are still bugs, but the good thing is these are getting patched quickly, and that's something we've talked about like before. Is if these security releases are a good thing, they're not a bad thing. It means that people are seeing these things and getting them patched up. WordPress is not any more hackable than Drupal or Joomla or anything else like that. It's just a new thing that's been integrated into core. And again, like a lot of people are DIY, and I think if you don't have someone like telling you like, hey, like turn this on or off, there's still that's where the potential for any type of vulnerability is. So it's always good to have someone at least to advise you like what to do. So Jonathan, how are we on time? We got time for one more story, or are we up?
Yeah, I think we let's just throw one in quickly and then we go on to the main topic. John, how does that sound?
It sounds good. Last story, we'll just go really quickly around the room. This one was, how many WordPress plugins is too many? The answer may surprise you. This is by Colin Newcomer on the WP Lift website. Chrissy, have you seen this floating around the interwebs?
Yeah, I have seen that floating around the interwebs, and I think it has less to do with the number of plugins and more to do with the quality of plugin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I bet all the plugins that I use and install, and I usually am aware of who the developer is and what their presence is in the WordPress community and what other projects they participated in and worked on, and so I think it absolutely has to do far more with the quality of plugin than it has to do with the number of plugin.
No, I totally agree. Sally, thoughts?
The answer did not surprise me.
Yeah.
I think essentially this article has been written many times before, and it's still a valid point. But yeah, it's not the number; it's how the plugin is written. Because if you have one bad plugin and it's your only plugin, that's too many. And you could have 50 or 60 and have them all be fairly lightweight, and you won't notice performance issues. And so it's not it isn't the number, and that's a point worth repeating. But yeah, the link bait title is kind of annoying.
Definitely. Jackie, any quick thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you think about how many files there are that run WordPress, and so they're actually in some ways just all plugins, really. I mean, they're just files calling other files, and that's what plugins do. So it's more what those plugins are doing that will affect your performance on your site or could cause vulnerabilities for you. So I totally agree with what Sally said there, is that it's more about what they're doing. So if you're installing a plugin and it has a lot of HTTP requests and it is loading up a style sheet and 3 JS files, then that's going to have more of a performance hit than just a PHP coded plugin, right? So maybe you have a simple plugin, it's 1 or 2 PHP files that make up the plugin. That's not going to have any real performance hit to your site at all. It's all the other things that most of the plugins are doing that will cause that. So, and when you vet those plugins, take a peek at them and see what's all going on inside. I think give you more comfort about which ones to use.
Yep, definitely. Kim?
Absolutely what they said. And that was his point in the article. The one thing I found that he missed is, yes, it's about the plugin. It can also be about specific configurations within a plugin. So take a good plugin like a security plugin and turn on that file change option, and you're going to hurt very often because it starts slowing it down. Fortunately, most of those plugins warn you of that before you turn it on. But that was the one thing I thought he missed, is you can take a good plugin, but certain configurations can still hurt.
Oh, I guess that's really true. Jonathan, any thoughts on
Well,
this?
I think Kim made an excellent point there. Some of these plugins, you need, well, either going to do a lot of pre-studying, which I think a lot of people won't do, or you're going to end up with a setup that probably was going to hurt. I think the other thing, I agree totally with what Jackie said. The only thing, the quantifier that I would state is that, based on my own experience, and I was guilty as this as anybody, is that obviously the more plugins you add, you are going to end up with a more complex setup. And it's really quite easy to end up with a lot of plugins. You know, I've got quite a few on the WP Tonic site. I think you could remove a couple of them with hindsight, but on the other hand, a lot of them I do use. And I think you just, I'm waffling now, aren't I, John? I just think you just got to take the sensible road and really think about, if you get a stable platform and you're thinking of adding something else to it, you really want to think about it before you add another plugin. What would you say, John?
Well, my take on this is, and one thing that Colin mentioned in this article is, you can get stuff off the repo, but some of these plugins are not actively maintained. And whenever I see stuff in the free repo, whether it's a choice between a plugin that's being maintained and one that hasn't been updated in 9 months, I'm going to choose the one that's actually being maintained every single time. The other thing is it's a lot of people that are either doing it themselves or hiring the college kid down the street. They might not have an understanding of how many calls a plugin is making to the database, or how many HTTP requests are actually happening. So it's good to actually have somebody to that can look at the site, audit what's doing what, how everything works together. And whenever you're adding or subtracting stuff, make sure you're doing it on a staging site for sure. So there you go. I've seen lots of sites with 50 plugins that run smooth, and some with only 10 or 15 that run sluggishly. So, yep. All right. I think we've exhausted our WordPress news stories this week. So we're going to come back from the break. We're going to be talking about what is UX design, what is user experience, how does that differ from other web design disciplines, and we'll see you after the break. We're coming back from the break, and we're talking with our WordPress panel about what is UX design, how does it differ from other web design disciplines. And I want to start with our guest, Chrissy, and other panelists. Feel free to jump in and ask questions as well. First off, what is user experience design? When people say UX, how does that differ from other disciplines within web design?
So I think user experience obviously puts a huge focus on the user. I think that it dictates that you need to know, not just be guessing, but really know who your users are. So you've done research on who those people are. You've ideally even spoken with those people. You know their habits. You know their preferences. You know their age range. You know their genders. You know all of those kind of details about them, and you know why they're interacting with whatever it is that you're building. And I think it all starts from there. And from there, you decide how you're wanting the user to engage, and then you're designing. So you're just doing a lot of stuff before you start designing to really make sure that you're keeping the user at the center of things. So that to me is kind of the difference there.
Definitely. Sally, when it comes to user experience design, have you worked on projects where that's a consideration? Like, how does user experience design play into putting together a site?
I've never worked on a project where we, kind of specifically said, all right, what's the UX design, but that, and in most cases, likely enough, we should. But getting that data about who's using the website and how they're using it and those details. Not everybody has that information, and so it's been more a matter of, I understand that anything that makes it difficult for a person to do what they've come to the site to do is going to create a bad user experience. And we want to avoid putting up unnecessary barriers. And I want to avoid putting up unnecessary barriers to my clients in managing their sites also. And, I've noticed that I've become sort of more and more aware of these, bad UX out in the world, even if it's just like, you go to the grocery store and the carts are next to the outdoor instead of the indoor. And so, you're trying to get your people are coming out the door and it just creates a mess. And so, it really does make a difference to kind of stop and think about, oh, how are people going to actually use this? And sometimes you can tell, like, because which is the indoor and which is the outdoor, and sometimes it's harder to figure out. And you may also have a case where there are a couple of different, groups of people who are using a website, and then you have to try to figure out how to make it workable for the largest number of people, which is something with which considering accessibility helps.
John,
you're muted.
Jackie, when you think of user experience design, when you think of user experience, what are impacts of bad user experience design that can harm like a product or a site?
One of the challenges I think most of us are all dealing with is when responsive design came out, it basically took us from you're designing on a desktop, and I wrote a post not too long ago about this mindset. Okay, so we all design on a desktop and we show clients everything on a desktop, and we don't typically do as much focusing on the mobile and the tablets and the small notebooks and things like that. And I think as that the usage is increasing on mobile, right? So like 60%, and that's basically coming down to knowing who your visitors are and where they're coming from, what devices they're using. I think that opens up a lot of possibilities about how to approach design. And Diane, Katie, and I did a episode on Rethink.fm about this. We were talking about designing user experiences instead of just designing the web page, design an experience for the user based on what device they're using. So, and I think adaptive design and some concepts around that are starting to bubble up, because many of us are finding that just scrunching things down and shoving your sidebar down below your main content in a mobile display is not really providing the best user experience for somebody on a mobile device or a tablet. And more when I'm talking to clients, and more when I am designing a website, I'm designing several different versions of that with different experiences, not just trying to take the desktop experience and make it work on mobile or make it look good on mobile. You actually really want to make it so that the user has a good experience on mobile. They're getting what they need. And a perfect example is, like, say you've got a local store website that you're doing, and on a mobile device, the user's needs may be completely different why they're visiting that site on mobile. They may want your address, your phone number, some other things. So you have to be thinking about, when you're designing that, how can you provide that information to them just as easily as they can find it on a desktop site. And it's not going to be just scrunching things down and hoping that they can find it. Because on a mobile device, first thing you realize is you don't even know if there is a sidebar. There is no sidebar anymore. There's nothing. All of that is gone. But yet all of the content is laid out and designed for a desktop, and you're just shoving it down to the bottom. Well, they may never even scroll down that far to ever even see that content. And if it's something that's important, that is what the side is for, right? So you've got a user, they're looking on the right side of the screen, and there's something there that you want them to see. On a mobile device, they may never see that. So you need to really be thinking about how to approach solving those issues.
No,
I think that's part of why single column layouts have become so popular.
I agree.
Yes.
I agree. Kim, you teach people how to put together like learning management systems. What kind of research and it goes into that, and what impact does UX like have on putting together like a LMS?
From the way I work with it, so if we look at the different dimensions of UX, so if you look at that, they define navigation and information, presentation, content, interaction, value, and usefulness are the 5 points I've always been taught about the user experience. For navigation and that type of thing, I'm not a designer. I'm more of the content developer person. So I do focus for those on the accessibility, figuring if I'm meeting the accessibility checkoffs, I'm probably doing okay on navigation. However, I really drill down with my customers on the content, the interaction, and the usefulness. Because if you're building an online course where you're trying to teach somebody something and you're not presenting the content properly with value and you're not developing interaction, they're going to leave. Second, my argument has always been, from my background as a trainer, if you don't have interaction, you don't have a class. If you just have a series of videos strung together, you've got a dang YouTube channel, but that is not a class. So that's where with my people, I really do the deep down on what's our content, our interaction, and making sure it's value and usefulness. And usefulness in the case of teaching means that at the end they can do whatever you're trying to teach them. Because if they can't, you've failed. So that's my big focus with the user experience.
So it's really about like removing obstacles to like an objective.
It's about removing obstacles, and it's about making sure that you're meeting your customers where they need and helping them learn what they need so that they can then accomplish it. And the more automated your class is, the more important that is. You know, if you've got some live classes / live webinars like I do in most of mine, it's easier because I'm there to see who's getting what. But if it's fully automated, you've got to have that there, or 99% of what happens is they just drop out. They do not finish it because they can't get it, and you've lost them.
I see. Jonathan, when it comes to user experience in some of the projects that you've done, how do you go about considering, both user research and implementing user experience into web projects?
Well, the only one I haven't, be quite truthful, and basically it's a cost consideration. But I thought Jackie and Christy put some great points. My own spin on this is there's been a couple sizable drivers that have made UX design rather important. Those drivers are physicality of device, basically like what Jackie was saying about mobile devices, tablets and phones, and how do you take something that works reasonably effective on a desktop scenario and then apply it to a much smaller device. That's been one driver, John. The second main driver has been the SaaS movement and the startup movement in the Bay Area and in other major metropolitan cities in the US. And my own project with MailRite and utilizing WordPress and the back end and trying in the restraints of the WordPress interface, which because of cost and the investment level, I didn't want to go and have to build a totally new interface. I wanted to utilize some of the key elements that seem to work in the WordPress interface and just manipulate them. But because of the SaaS movement, and it's really important, people, very similar to what Kim said, if people can't use your online service or product easily, they're going to stop using it, aren't they, John? and which is linked to what Jackie said about mobile. It's the same thing. If they can use some service or some website on the desktop, but then when they go to the mobile, and they might not even scroll all the way down to the bottom, so they won't be able to use it. So it all comes why UX design has become such a hot subject, isn't it, John?
Definitely. I want to ask Chrissy, a couple of questions, but first one, a lot of times when you see people either describe their role or list like jobs, they'll often put UX and UI together, like UX UI. And I know this is like a big debate, like UX versus UI. Do you want to just like kind of go into that a little bit and what the actual differences are between user experience and user interface design?
Yeah, so in my thoughts here are that UX is a little bit more kind of like strategy. We're thinking about the user, we're thinking about what we want the user to do, and user interface is a little bit more about what the actual interface looks like. It's about buttons and consistency in what inputs look like throughout the site as a whole. It's that somebody knows like, oh, that's clickable, versus I'm not really sure what that thing is. Is that a button? Is it just a graphic? So those are that kind of how I see those things being different.
And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you too, UX is obviously very research driven, and so when it comes to figuring out what type of research you're doing and with which users, how do you go about like doing that research, and then how do you go about like implementing that research as either presenting it as a strategy before you go into the designer? How does that even work?
Yeah, so one of my favorite ways to do the research is when we're kind of doing like a holistic view on the company and marketing kind of as a whole. So, and I kind of sit in like the digital seat in that regard, and we actually sit down with them and we ask the company to define who their clients are, who their customers are, and we ask them to focus on like who are the most important, and let's actually stereotype. The word kind of gets a bad rap, but let's actually stereotype them. And kind of try to cull these down into some personas. And so then from there, let's try to vet these assumptions that we're making. Let's contact some people, let's have some interviews, let's have them fill out some surveys and get to really, really know them really, really well. And then also looking at current analytics, and it really depends how much you want to look at current analytics, because sometimes current analytics are not indicative of what you're wanting for the future. So, I can look at a site that isn't mobile responsive and I can say, well, gee, only 20% of your users are on mobile. Well, only 20% of your users are on mobile because the site doesn't work on mobile. So to make a design decision off that would be a poor choice. But it's definitely something to look at. So, I think actually having conversations with real users, looking at analytics, one really fun tool is a tool called Lucky Orange. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's something that you could install on your site, and you have to be careful because it will consume some resources, so you want to be aware of that. But man, it gives you some fantastic user engagement just data. You can set it up and it'll tell you like the user was going through and they were filling out this form, and at this question 70% of people bailed. So then all of a sudden you have like really great information of like where the breakpoint was and how we could go in and fix it. It also gives you like heat maps of pages. It'll tell you, percentage of users where the content falls above the fold for them. So it'll like you kind of like go down the little page and it'll be like, 90% of people can see this above the fold, and then you slowly start to see people drop off. Just gives like lots of really, really good data on how users are actually interacting with your site. So those are probably like my big tools that I like to use.
Excellent. I want to ask this, Jonathan.
Oh, sorry. I thought it's just a fantastic thing Christy was saying, but I just want to ask Christy, do you think, on reflection, the user base, what can, obviously you want to build the most easy, especially, I'm really talking around the SaaS product area. Obviously you want to build the most easiest interface that you can, but obviously there's always, would you agree with this statement, there's always a balance with ease of usability and functionality. The more functionality you put into a product, the more complex the interface is going to be if it's doing multiple tasks. So you want to make, but there's only so far you can make it simple, isn't there? But then is it also affected by where the product is aimed at? The people's around this, I call it familiarity. Sally has pointed out most people, she did a fantastic presentation at the Sacramento WordCamp around, familiarity of other products affects our ability to use other products. And the example is Microsoft Word. So I've just thrown a lot of stuff at you.
Yeah.
But I just wondered what some of your thoughts about that are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to coalesce down, think through the specific things that you asked. I think the familiarity of how people interact on the web, obviously we're all in this together. So I can't kind of decide that this little icon means something to me, but if it's not being used that way outside of my little group, then is it really effective? Probably not. So it is, we're all kind of contributing to driving what users know and understand. I don't know who used the first hamburger menu, who decided that was a menu icon, but obviously somebody was first and it made enough sense that other people started using it, so it's a more familiar icon. So there's definitely something to be said for familiarity, and you definitely have to look at what are current web trends, what are people familiar with, and one of the questions that we ask people is, what sites are you on? Where are you on a regular basis on the internet? And that is a question from letting us get a peek into their personality a little bit, but also what are the user experiences that they're having right now? What do those look like? So yeah, I think you have to take that into consideration. And I'm trying to remember where you started from.
Yeah, I am as well. But no, the other thing is, obviously, the first part of mine is coming from this quick story I'll give to you, and I'm looking at a different customer management system than the one I'm using at the present moment, and I'm looking at one that's called Autopilot. And it's a startup that's been around for a couple of years, and they managed to get $20 million in finance. So it's a well-financed product. And I'm looking at their interface, and it's very stylish, very slick, but I'm on my 4th hour of trying to work out how this thing works, right?
Yeah.
And I'm back to having to take some webinars that they run just to learn how to use the key functionality. And it all looks really pretty, and it has certain functionality that would really benefit me. So I'm staying with it to some extent. I'm going to invest a couple more hours into it, and then if I still can't make head or tail of it, I'm probably going to drop it. But they have a ton of functionality in this product, Christy. It does a lot of stuff. So is it a UX problem, or is it they've just got a load of functionality, or is it a mixture of both? They've just got a lot of functionality, and they're doing the best with the UX design, if you know what I mean.
Sure. So from my vantage point, everything's a UX problem. So I think in this situation, we're just going to assume that, you know what, I'm going to need a power cord here in just a minute. So I'll say this real quick and then I'm going to go run and grab one. Sorry. That we're just going to assume that the functions need to exist for people to be interested in the software. So then you have the problem of how do we make all these functions work in a way that is intuitive? And at some level, there is so much data and so much information and so many things that need to happen that intuitiveness is difficult. And so then you have the user experience from the standpoint of how are they actually prepping you? And there's lots of different ways that a company can prep you for understanding that this is going to be, there's going to be a learning curve. Like when you engage with our product, there's going to be a learning curve. And so one, are you letting people know that up front so they know what to expect? Or are you presenting an idea that this is going to be super easy? Once you buy this product, everything's just going to work flawlessly. So I think it's setting user expectations. And then I think it's obviously providing resources that are easy and intuitive for the learning. So like you mentioned the tutorials, obviously there's some tutorials out there. I don't know if that company is providing them directly or if other third-party people have said, oh, we need to create a tutorial for them, and how those tutorials are presented. So if this were my product, I would probably do a lot of modal windows and like walkthroughs. So when a user first starts to engage, there is literally going to be some like step-by-step things, and they get a modal window and it kind of explains the next step, and it's probably that window is actually connected to a control or is directing them to where that next piece is on the page. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of solve that problem. And so that's kind of my user experience perspective on it.
And get your power cord.
Okay, I'll be right back.
I'm going to ask the rest of the panel really quick, like what are some great UX or user experience resources that you've learned from or that people would benefit from reading, I guess. I'll start with Sally.
Right. I think something everybody should read is Tragic Design. Which is, it started out as an article on Medium, and it's now a book in kind of pre-release from O'Reilly about, you know, the serious effects that bad design can have. I mean, you know, it's probably nobody's going to die if your website is badly done, but, you know, it talks about how, well, there were these, you know, medical monitors that were very hard to read and somebody missed seeing something, and, you know, this poor kid died as a result of it. And so, you know, that it really does matter how easy you make things to use. And then the other thing is just a quote I first heard many years ago. I was looking it up. It's apparently from Oliver Wendell Holmes. You know, I would not give a fig for the simplicity this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. That, you know, finding a way to simplify a difficult, you know, a product that's got a ton of features, you know, that's always been a big challenge. And this like goes back to the sort of setup wizard days of your, you know, of your software that you install on the desktop. It's like Chrissy was saying, is, you know, if you know that there is no way around having a lot of, you know, options or settings or whatever. I mean, if you look at something like WooCommerce and you think, it's overwhelming. Well, let me tell you, all these things, pretty much all those settings are in Shopify, and because, you know what, having a store is overwhelming. You have to think about stuff like taxes and shipping and you know, discounts and all of those things. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to deal with. And so then it's kind of figuring out, yeah, okay, what is a logical way? What is a way to take people through this that's going to, you know, relieve some of the pain of having to deal with all that? And yeah, again, the expectation setting. I have talked about this before, that, you know, there have been too many WordPress plugins and too many, you know, even discussions of WordPress that kind of sell it as being easy, and mostly it's not actually. It's fairly easy to learn, but it is not actually easy.
John, you're muted again.
Goodness. Jackie, any resources that you would recommend?
Actually, our own Morton Rand Hendrickson has some great courses on Lynda about UX design, content strategy, and I found it very helpful. I'm a video learner, so for me, those types of resources are very helpful. And I think he's got 2 courses on there that really encapsulated a lot of how you should approach a UX design. I found that very helpful. So if you have a Lynda subscription or a LinkedIn Learning subscription, go check it out.
Excellent. Kim, any resources that you would like to recommend?
Definitely the one Sally mentioned. If you're interested in some of the bigger picture, there's a company out there called Human Factors International, and they do a lot of kind of corporate training. So maybe they're a little higher level than sometimes we deal with in the WordPress environment, but they do have a lot of free information about UX on their sites. So you don't have to actually get into their, you don't have to go into their corporate programs, but they have a lot of good info. I had an extra question to everybody because it's something I'm getting ready to do with my rebrand. Has anyone here ever hired one of the third-party UX testing companies to do the live testing with people and then give you the report?
Yes.
What was your experience with that?
Worth it. Yeah, worth it. I actually, like, really early on, like one of the very first things I did, like back in 2012, right before I broke out and did freelance, is I actually was like one of the testers for user testing. So, and I have hired like people to do it before. It really gives you a lot of insight for people that, you know, maybe if you just want to get like a really super basic thing, you can get like one like little freebie, user testing peak. I'll link that up in show notes as well, but user testing is good. There are some other ones out there. I think there's one called Feedbacker. It's kind of more basic. I would say user testing is more the gold standard. These other ones are just kind of, you don't know what you're going to get. But there are other ones that, like if you're on a budget, but I would say definitely invest in it. It's totally worth it. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep. Jonathan, any resources on UX?
Well, my memory's failing me. I will put them in the show notes. There's one resource, but my memory's failing me actually. But it's a very broad subject, isn't it? We have to have Christy back again and discuss some more about this, because it is at the crux of if you've got of the onboarding, because you're also dealing with. I feel there's only so far you can simplify something, and then you've got to say, well, we've done the best we can, and then you go on to the onboarding experience, which is another whole aspect of this, isn't it, John?
Yeah, for real, for real. I would, before I ask Chrissy, like her favorite resources, I'm going to just toss a couple out there that I think are good. One is it's a site called darkpatterns.org, and that kind of explains a lot of the kind of anti-patterns that you see in UX, where people like kind of guide you nefariously toward the things that they want you to do. Instead of giving you choices, they kind of, you know, pre-select the choice and then guide you toward them, and that's something they call dark patterns. Another thing that I want to add is a book by Erica Hall called Just Enough Research is available on a book apart. You can buy either like the PDF or you can get the you know, physical book shipped to you. That's pretty cool. And another book called The Design of Everyday Things. It's a classic. You can probably find that on Amazon for $1 or so. I want to ask Chrissy, like, you know, what are some of your go-to resources, books, sites, you know, videos, anything like that, that people could benefit and learn more about UX from?
Man, I kind of just absorb everything from all over. So I don't know if I have any like super specific resources, but probably like the thing that I probably have maybe drawn a lot from is, I'm trying to remember the exact name of the book, but it's a book apart, and I think it's called Designing for Emotion. And it talks a lot about how that design impacts how people feel about things, and kind of like you were talking about with the dark patterns, that's something I am familiar with as well. And I always try to, because there's like direct interaction, but then there's also that kind of like intrinsic, how do people feel about how they interacted with the product? And I think that the automatic pop-up windows, like statistically people tell us that if you pop up a window on a site after somebody has been there for X amount of time and ask them to fill out a form and subscribe to something, that works. The statistics support that. But there's a good way to do it from how you're leaving the taste in the mouth of the user, and then there's a bad way to do it. And so, thinking about those things is not just looking at statistics, but also looking about the impression that we're leaving on people. And, same kind of deal with the dark patterns of if you've pre-selected things, but they're not for the best interest of the user, they're for the best interest of the company. And thinking about how, maybe they went ahead and submitted the form, but they got a bad taste in their mouth. So, those are kind of the things that I like to, I guess, think about or think through. Not always like the direct user engagement, but the kind of that indirect, and how that's going to shape their thoughts and feelings about how they interact with that brand or that site or whatever in the future.
Most definitely. Anyway, does anybody else have any questions for anyone else, or no? We're good here. Okay. Well, before we wrap it up, I just want to again thank our sponsor, Liquid Web. Be sure to go to liquidweb.com/WordPress. Use that code WPTonic33. You get 33% off your first 6 months. We're going to stack all these links up in the show notes. And if you're getting value from this show, remember, go to iTunes, leave a detailed review. It helps surface the show, helps everybody find this. Our next episode is we're going to have Chris Lemma and AJ Morris from Liquid Web talking about the WordPress community and why that's important. That'll be next Wednesday. And then next Saturday, I'll have to look up what it is. I'll let you know before the end, but I'll let the panel let everybody know how to find them. Chrissy, how do we find you? How can we follow you? And do you have anything you want to promote?
I don't have anything that I want to promote, but you can absolutely find me either Chrissy Ray on Twitter or North UX Design on Twitter. And both of those handles are the same on Instagram. And you can also send me an email at chrissy@northuxdesign.com.
Sweet. Sally, how do we get a hold of you?
I should unmute. You can find me at wpfangirl.com. I am at Sally Getch on Twitter. And if you can spell my name, there's only one of me in Google. So that will be me.
Sweet. Jackie, how do we get a hold of you?
You can reach me at jackiedelia.com, on Twitter at jdelia, and I'm also the host of Rethink.fm. And before season 2 starts, if you haven't catched any of the episodes from season 1, go check them out at Rethink.fm.
Awesome. Kim, how do we get a hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter at Kim Shivler, or on the web at whiteglovewebtraining.com.
Excellent. And Jonathan, how do we get a hold of you? Jonathan? Oh, hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. He's unmuted me, folks. He's got the power.
I did. I muted you.
Yeah. A lot of people want to do that, folks. But on the 22nd, next week on Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're having a special live interview with AJ Morris and Chris Lemmer of Liquid Web. We will be having an extensive question and answer session after the formal interview. Hopefully as many as the panel will be able to join us, and you're invited as well. If you go to the WP Tonic website /blab, you'll find a link there and you can subscribe, and then you can be part of the live question and answer session. And it should be a great show, shouldn't it, John?
Yeah, definitely. That will be this Wednesday at February 22nd. On the 25th, next Saturday, we're going to be talking about why web design communities matter. On March 1st, we're going to have Mario Peshev of DevryX, and on March 8th, Emily White of Emily White Designs. For the WP Tonic, oh, and yeah, you can find me lockdowndesign.com. You can find me on Twitter, lockdown_, and for the WP Tonic, I'm saying adios, sayonara, peace out, we out of here, and get your dose.